this time on behalf of Dr Kuan Yew Tan on trap-neuter-return activities in urban stray cat colonies of Australia. Thank you.
Thank you. Good. And I'd just like to acknowledge Kuan Tan. He's in Norway at the moment. He did this project also as a fifth-year research elective project. And again, acknowledge John Morton's assistance with the epidemiology and the stats. Kittens everywhere. More kittens and cats. More cats. Killing wildlife. Fighting, making noises at night. Peeing everywhere. God damn it. Did you realise, though, that 1 in 15 to 20 people feed a stray cat every day in Australia and they don't perceive they own it? Now, they care for it, and they may feed more than one cat. And if you calculate that out for Melbourne and Sydney each, that's 300,000 cats that are being fed daily by people who don't perceive ownership. And in Brisbane, Perth and Adelaide, that's about 60 to 120,000, depending on the population. Most are not desexed and are producing kittens. So what are we going to do? They're coming to shelters and pounds. Well, based on our the paper that we've just published and analysing the data across Australia, we're killing about 3 to 5% of the stray cat population in shelters and pounds every year in Australia. And that's equivalent to sustainably farming cats and regularly harvesting kittens and juveniles. But it keeps the population there in place and reproducing. And if you'd like some evidence, is it working? So New South Wales is the only state that's got comprehensive data at the state level for their pounds. And this is data over a 7-year period from 2008 to 2015. And during that time, New South Wales pounds took in 173,000 cats and killed over 100,000 of them. Did it reduce intake? No. Now, research done by this smart guy Miller, who did some really sophisticated modelling studies, and he said, yes, you can decrease cat numbers by culling, but you have to kill 30 to 50% of the population every 6 months for at least 10 years. So in Melbourne or Sydney, we've got to kill 200,000 cats in the first year and keep on killing. And that's going to cost about $100 million in the first year, and we're going to have to build shelters and pounds to hold them for the minimum holding period, and that's not included in the $100 million. Or we can manage them by desexing, adopting kittens and friendly adults, and returning the rest to where they were found. Now that's called trap-neuter-return. It's got a lot of other names, but that's the one that's most commonly used. And overseas research shows it works, but it's illegal in most jurisdictions in Australia. And the current RSPCA policy doesn't support it, although I think that will change. I'm hoping it will change this year. But the AVA still doesn't support it, in part because they say there's no evidence it works in Australia. And I've had several conversations with them. So the aims of this study were to describe trap-neuter-return activities in Australia and to estimate the effect on colony size. So again, we used was a targeted convenience sample, and thanks to Maggie's Rescue, who helped us with this survey. It took us a long time to get ethics approval because we're asking people about illegal activities, and the University of Queensland deemed it high risk, and it had to go to an ethics committee outside the university, which took them 6 months to decide whether we could do it or not. And we had to use Maggie's Rescue because they were concerned about people being traced through the university, because universities are government bodies and Freedom from Information could get their IP addresses. So it was an online, It was sent to Maggie's Rescue's email address people and asking them to also forward it on, which is a snowballing effect. So SurveyMonkey, if people were concerned about being traced, and although SurveyMonkey you can turn off the IP addresses, they can still be apparently obtained. So they could download a Word version and post it anonymously, and we did get less than half a dozen that came in that way. And we requested people to only complete the questionnaire if TNR was conducted in urban areas. We were not interested in bushland, national parks or state forests or reserves. And the questionnaire consisted of open and closed questions. We asked them about the location of the TNR sites and the colonies, the demographics of the respondent, the motivations for them being involved, and their TNR operations, including feeding, trapping, desexing, and all of those things. So what were the results? We had 53 people respond, and we had good data from 44 colonies. 90% of them were female. The peak age group was 46 to 55 years of age. More were involved as individuals rather than with organisations. And the reasons that they became involved with TNR, 77% said, I wanted to stop the breeding. 67% said, this makes life better for cats. And 60% said the cats were at risk of being trapped and killed by authorities. And in the free-form comments, these were some of the comments. Breeding was rampant, and it wasn't possible to bring all the cats into foster care for rehoming. The colony in my street were breeding, and there were so many kittens, and many died. It was a mess. I had to learn TNR. Now the colony's small, and many have been rehomed. Where was it conducted? 97% were in major urban areas and the rest were in smaller towns and cities. All major capital cities were represented around Australia. 26% of the cats that were managed by TNR, or 26% of the colonies, were on private residential property. 20% industrial areas, factory complexes, and 13% were on streets and alleyways. And then there was a real mix of hospitals, schools, government housing, around shopping centres and food outlets. Before they started TNR, the respondents said that the median, and again that represents it's not average, it's 50% of cats, the colony size was 50% of, so the average, well, the colony size was 11.5 cats, and so half the colonies were bigger than that, half the colonies were less than that. So that's when they started. At the time they reported, it had reduced to 6.5 cats, so that's a 31% reduction, and the median time that they'd been managing the colony was 2.2 years. So half were managed for longer, half were managed for less. Of the adults in the colonies, a median of 100% were desexed. It did range from 47 to 100. And a median of 3 kittens or cats were rehomed and removed from the colony. Now, some colonies didn't decrease, and we had really good data on 21 colonies where everything matched. So the number of males and females, the percentage totaled 100, and it totaled what they told us were in the colony. The number of kittens and adults, it totaled the number they said in the colony, number that were desexed or not desexed. So everything totaled up. We had really good data on 21 colonies. And when you looked at those, the numbers declined in 16 of the colonies, they weren't changed in 1 colony, and they increased in 4 colonies. So we asked, well, what was the difference between those that decreased compared to those that didn't decrease? And one was longer duration that they'd been doing TNR. So there was more time for natural attrition to occur. So the ones that declined The median time they'd been going for was 3.2 years compared to 6 months. More of the colony was adopted. So over that 3.2 years, a median of cats that equalled nearly half the colony size had been adopted and removed, and that was the initial colony size. And slightly more were desexed of the total colony. That includes kittens. So, in Australia, in America too, abandoning a cat is illegal, and TNR is often referred to as abandoning cat. But 88% of these people kept medical records on the cats, 44% were microchipped, and they registered themselves as the carer. If an organisation was involved, they registered that as a secondary contact on the database. 62% vaccinated the kittens, 77% intestinal parasites and fleas were treated. For feeding, most fed daily, and a little over half fed once daily, the rest fed twice daily. About half fed in daylight hours and the others fed before dawn and after dusk. Usually there was no special feeding station. Food was placed on the ground by 80% of the carers, and food was left to be eaten at any time by just over half. So the total time of all people who were involved in caring for that colony, for feeding, it was a median of 7 hours per week for the colony. Locating resources were 2 hours per week. Maintaining community relations was 1.5 hours per week, and organising feeding rosters were 1 hour per week. This paper's now been published in Animals, it's online, it's open access, and you can see all the other activities that contributed time, and there was a big range. Trapping, most of them used commercial traps, or some used a mixture of commercial and homemade. Most people habituated the cats to regular feeding schedule before putting out the trap. And when we asked them the number of days it took to trap a cat, if it was not in a feeding schedule, it took a median of 4 days. If it was in a feeding schedule, it took a median of 1 day to trap them. 91% reported that someone sat nearby until the cat was trapped, and the other 8%, the traps were checked at least twice in a 24-hour period. With the desexing, most respondents attempted to desex most or all of the colony in a short time. In reality, 63% reported desexing 80 to 100% of the colony in 6 months or more. Most of the desexings were done at private veterinary clinics, but some welfare organisations contributed. Male cats were returned after a median of 1 night of hospitalisation. Female cats returned a median of 4 days. Desexing costs ranged from $0 to $300, with medians of $60 for male cats, $100 for female cats, and pregnant queens of $115. Most respondents reported that it was their or their organisation's practice to remove adoptable adult cats for adoption. And 92% of respondents removed kittens up to 12 weeks of age for adoption. In 26% of colonies, they reported that no kittens were born in the previous 12 months. Funding. The respondents contributed cash or in kind for transport, desexing, traps, bedding and food. And, they used other private sources for desexing, traps and food. And traps were sometimes provided by local welfare organisations. Note, no government money was spent on these programs. So in summary, what do you prefer? Do you prefer keep spending money on farming cats, and particularly taxpayers' dollars? Or Do you prefer in Melbourne and Sydney to kill 200,000 cats in the first year? We can forget about new roads and hospitals and let's spend $100 million on doing that. Or what about we legalise TNR, engage with the community to manage, desex, adopt or return cats? Our recommendations are that we legalise TNR, we implement guidelines for best practice. And I'd just like to recognise funding support from Four Paws. Maggie's Rescue was just instrumental in getting this over the line and getting ethics approval and helping us get the survey out to people in Australia. Professor Helen Swarbrick from the University of New South Wales helped us, Jennifer Moffat and Lee Omani, who's here too. And that's all I have to say.